Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Whispers Stories. Here, in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, the night never ends. The wind carries whispers that sound almost human, and sometimes whispers your name. Today, its stories come from the edge of the map, from frozen towns swallowed by snow, oil camps abandoned overnight, and lonely roads where headlights disappear into nowhere. These are real encounters, told by people who were never the same again. If you can hear my voice right now, then just listen. Join the darkness. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories so you will never be alone with the night. Click on the bell icon, because when new horrors rise from the ice, I'll want to be the first to know. And after listening, leave a comment. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. Your thoughts support this channel, and sometimes the creatures in the darkness are listening too. Now get comfortable, because in Alaska, the cold ice and empty. It is watching. Story 1. What moves in the ice? The woman in the glacier has been dead for over 300 years, but she is still moving. I have proof. I have footage that has cost me my career, my credibility, and very nearly my sanity. And I am about to tell you why nobody will ever see it. My name is Jake Morrison. I was a glaciologist with the University of Alaska until 4 months ago. I spent 7 years studying ice, understanding it, respecting it. I thought I knew everything there was to know about glaciers. How they form, how they move, how they preserve what falls into them. I was wrong about all of it. The Mendenhall Glacier sits just outside Juneau, one of the most accessible glaciers in Alaska. Tourists by the thousands come every year to walk the trails and take pictures of the blue ice. It is beautiful, massive, ancient, and it is melting fast. Every year the glacier recedes further, exposing rock and sediment and things that have been frozen for centuries. The local Tlingit people have stories about the glacier, old stories that most scientists dismissed as folklore. They talk about a woman who went into the ice during a harsh winter sometime in the 1700s. The stories vary depending on who tells them, but the core is always the same. She walked into the glacier willingly, pressed herself into a crevasse and let the ice take her. Some versions say she was running from something. Others say she was searching for something. A few say she was neither running nor searching, but waiting. Waiting for what? The stories never say. But they all agree on one thing. She is still in there, still conscious, still aware, frozen but not dead. And when the ice melts enough, she'll come out. I first heard these stories from a grad student named Marie who had grown up in Juneau. We were installing monitoring equipment on the glacier face, and she mentioned them casually, the way you mention any local legend. I laughed it off, told her that anything frozen in ice for 300 years would be nothing but a well-preserved corpse. That consciousnness doesn't survive freezing. That it was a nice story but biologically impossible. She got quiet then, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her grandmother had seen the woman, not in person, in the ice, a shape that looked human, visible through a blue section of the glacier during an unusually warm summer in 1987. The shape had moved, shifted position over the course of several days. Park rangers investigated and found nothing. Put it down to optical illusions caused by melting ice and shifting light. But Marie's grandmother never went near the glacier again. I filed it away as interesting but irrelevant. Glaciers do strange things to light and perception. People see patterns and random formations all the time. It is basic psychology. The human brain is wired to find faces and human shapes even where none exist. Then I saw the drone footage. We've been using drones to map the glacier's retreat, documenting how fast the ice was melting and which areas were most affected. Standard research. Nothing unusual. But when I was reviewing footage from a flight over the eastern section, I saw something that made me rewind and watch again. And again, there was a shape in the ice, about 40 feet below the surface, roughly human-sized. The ice around it was darker, denser, like it had formed differently than the surrounding glacier. And in the span of the 3-hour flight, across multiple passes, the shape had changed position. Not dramatically, just slightly, an arm that seemed more extended, a head that appeared to have turned, small differences that could have been explained by lighting or camera angle. Except the drone, its altitude and trajectory were consistent. The lighting hadn't changed, and the shape had definitely moved. I didn't tell anyone at first. I spent 2 weeks analyzing the footage, running it through every filter and enhancement tool I had access to. I compared it to images from previous flights. The shape had been there for at least 6 months, visible in roughly the same location. But in the recent footage, it was different, more defined, closer to the surface, and unquestionably in different positions across the various passes. I finally showed it to my department head, Dr. Reeves, a 30-year veteran of glaciology who did publish more papers than anyone I knew. She watched the footage 3 times without saying anything. Then she closed the laptop and told me to delete it, to forget I'd ever seen it, to focus on the data that mattered, the temperature readings and ice composition, and stop wasting time on optical anomalies. When I pressed her, when I insisted this was worth investigating, she got angry. Told me that every few years someone sees something in the Mendenhall and it always turns out to be nothing. That pursuing it would make me look like a fool and damage the department, this reputation. That if I valued my career, I'd drop it immediately. But I couldn't drop it, because the next drone flight showed the shape even closer to the surface. And this time, I could see details. What looked like long hair spreading through the ice. What might have been hands pressed against a section of clearer ice from the inside. And what I was almost certain was a face. I went to the glacier alone. Against protocol. Against common sense. I took climbing gear and made my way to the section where the shape was located. The ice there was fractured, with deep crevasses that glowed blue in the afternoon sun. Meltwater ran everywhere, creating streams and pools that made the footing treacherous. And the sound, God, the sound, ice cracking and groaning like something alive, like something in pain. I found the spot, recognized it from the drone footage, and there she was, visible through a section of ice that had thinned to maybe 20 feet. A woman, perfectly preserved. She wore clothes that looked handmade, some kind of hide or leather that had frozen with her. Her hair was dark and long, spread out around her head like she was underwater. Her eyes were closed, her mouth slightly open, and her hands were pressed against the ice above her, fingers spread, like she was pushing, like she was trying to break through. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring. My brain kept trying to rationalize what I was seeing. People had fallen into glaciers before. Bodies had been preserved for centuries. This wasn't supernatural. This was just a remarkably well-preserved corpse that happened to be positioned in an unusual way. The movement I'd seen in the footage was just the ice shifting as it melted, carrying her with it. Nothing more. Then her finger moved. Just one finger, the index finger on her right hand. It bent, slowly, deliberately, like she was beckoning, like she knew I was there and wanted me to come closer. I ran, scrambled back down the ice face so fast I nearly fell twice. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the climbing rope. When I reached solid ground, I looked back up at the glacier. At that section of blue ice. And I swear I could see her shape more clearly than before. Could see that her eyes were no longer closed. I went straight to the Park Service, told them there was a body in the glacier that needed to be recovered. Gave them the exact coordinates. They sent a team up the next day with ice-penetrating radar and climbing equipment. And they found nothing. The radar showed normal ice density. No anomalies, no voids that might contain a body. And when they examined the section ID indicated, they saw no shape. No woman, just ice and rock and the usual debris that glaciers collect. They thought I was mistaken, or that I'd been at altitude too long and experienced some kind of hypoxia-induced hallucination. They were polite about it, professional, but I could see the looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't too watching. The looks that said I lost it. That the glacier had gotten to me the way it gets to people sometimes. The isolation, the endless white, the way ice can play tricks with light and perception. But I had the footage. I went back to my office and pulled up every frame I captured. And it was gone, not the footage itself, the shape. She wasn't there anymore. The ice showed the same fractured patterns, the same blue-white color. But no woman, no human form, no hands pressed against the ice from below, like she'd never been there at all. I checked the earlier footage, the images from 6 months ago that had first caught my attention. She was gone from those too. Every single frame I saved, every screenshot I taken. The woman had vanished from all of it. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach twist, that she hadn't disappeared from the footage. She'd gotten out. The dream started that night. I was walking on the glacier. It was dark, but somehow I could see perfectly. The ice glowed from within, and I could hear breathing, slow and steady, coming from below my feet. I looked down, and there would be faces in the ice. Dozens of them, hundreds, all pressed against the underside, all watching me, all with their hands raised, all beckoning, and in the center of them all was her. The woman. Her eyes were open now. Completely black. No whites, no iris, just black. And she was smiling. Her mouth opened wide enough that I could see she had too many teeth. Far too many. They filled her mouth and rose like a shark. And I realized that the breathing I was hearing wasn't coming from below. It was coming from behind me. Hot breath on the back of my neck. The smell of old ice and older decay. I did wake up with frost on my pillow. Actual frost. In a heated apartment in Juneau in late summer. And my hands would be wet. Not with sweat. With meltwater. Cold and slightly silty, like it had come from the glacier itself. I tried to tell people. Tried to explain what I'd seen. What was happening. Dr. Reeves put me on leave. Said I needed rest. Maybe some counseling. The university was very understanding. Very supportive. And very clear that if I continued talking about a woman in the glacier, my position would be terminated. So I stopped talking. Started researching instead. Digging into historical records and Tlingit oral histories. Looking for anything that matched what I'd seen. And I found something. A journal entry from a Russian explorer who come through the area in 1842. He wrote about the local people, the sphere of a specific section of ice. About how they said a woman had gone into the glacier during the Great Winter of 1723. But not to die, to transform, to become something that could survive the cold. Something that could wait. The explorer noted that the Tlingit believed she would emerge when the world became warm enough. When the ice that held her finally melted away. Climate change. The glacier had been retreating for decades, melting faster every year, exposing things that had been frozen for centuries. And now it had exposed her, or she'd gotten close enough to the surface to push through, to escape whatever prison she made for herself 300 years ago. I went back to the glacier one last time. 3 weeks ago. Not to the spot where I'd seen her. I knew she wouldn't be there. Instead, I went to the visitor center, walked the trails with the tourists, listened to people exclaim over the beauty of the ice, watched children press their hands against the viewing areas and marvel at how cold it was. And I saw her, not in the glacier, among the tourists, a woman standing at the edge of the group. She wore modern clothes, jeans and a jacket. Her hair was down, dark and long. And when she turned to look at me, I saw her face. The same face from the ice. Younger somehow, less weathered, but definitely her. And her eyes were completely black. She smiled, that same too wide smile from my dreams. And then she turned and walked into the forest. Just walked away from the group and disappeared into the trees. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody else reacted, like she'd been invisible to everyone except me. I don't know what she is. What she has become after 300 years frozen in the glacier. The Tlingit story's done to say. They just warn that she is dangerous, that she has been changed by the ice, that she is not human anymore, if she ever was, and that now she is free, and the melting will only accelerate. More things will come out. More shapes in the ice will reach the surface and push through into the warm world. I quit my job, moved to Seattle, put as much distance between myself and the Mendenhall Glacier as I could manage while still being on the West Coast. But she has followed me. I see her sometimes, standing across the street, sitting in coffee shops, always watching, always smiling, her black eyes tracking my movements. And the frost keeps appearing on my windows, my bathroom mirror, my pillow, like she is marking where she has been, like she is letting me know she can find me anywhere. The glacier is still melting, faster every year, and I wonder how many more are in there. How many shapes are moving through the ice, working their way to the surface? How many have been waiting centuries for the world to warm enough to set them free? The drone footage is gone, deleted from every server and backup. But I remember what I saw. I remember her moving. I remember her hands pressed against the ice. I remember that beckoning finger. And I remember that she is out now, walking among us, wearing human skin but not human anymore. Changed by the ice into something that can survive the cold. That maybe needs the cold. Something that has been waiting 300 years to see what the world has become. Something that knows the glaciers are melting everywhere, and soon all the frozen things will be free. If you ever go to the Mendenhall Glacier, pay attention to the ice. Look for shapes that seem too regular, too human. And if you see a woman with black eyes watching from the edge of the trail, dawn to acknowledge her. Dawn, let her know you can see her. Because once she knows, once she marks you the way she has marked me, you become part of whatever she is doing. Whatever she's been waiting for all these frozen centuries. The Ice Woman is real. And she is not alone anymore. Story 2. City that shouldn't exist. I stopped flying over the North Slope 3 months ago. And I need you to understand why before they find me. My name is Marcus Webb. I've been a cargo pilot in Alaska for 19 years. I've flown through whiteouts that turned the world into static. That landed on ice runways that cracked under my wheels. I've seen the northern lights do things that made my instruments go haywire. But nothing prepared me for what I saw on October 7th at 37,000 feet. The city that appears where nothing should be. The first time, I thought it was a reflection, some trick of light bouncing off ice crystals in the upper atmosphere. I was running supplies from Fairbanks to Deadhorse, a route I'd flown 200 times. Same corridor, same landmarks, same empty tundra stretching to the horizon. Except this time, it wasn't empty. The city appeared at 11:42 in the morning. I glanced down during a routine systems check, and there it was. Massive, modern, impossible. Skyscrapers rising from the permafrost, glass towers catching the sun, streets laid out in perfect grids. I could see vehicles moving along highways. Could see the geometric patterns of neighborhoods spreading outward from the central downtown area. The whole thing covered maybe 30 square miles. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. My first thought was that I'd somehow gotten turned around. That I was looking at Anchorage or Fairbanks from a weird angle. But my instruments showed me exactly where I was. Right over the North Slope, middle of nowhere, 200 miles from the nearest settlement. I grabbed my phone, started recording, kept my eyes locked on that city, afraid it would vanish if I looked away. It did anyway. 7 seconds. That is how long it lasted. 7 seconds of impossible architecture gleaming in the Arctic sun. Then it was gone. Just tundra again. Flat, brown, empty. I played the video back immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The city was there on the recording. Clear as day. Undeniable. I reported it when I landed. Told the operations manager what I'd seen. Showed him the video. He watched it twice. His face going from skeptical to confused to something else. Something that looked like fear. He asked me not to share the video with anyone. Said he needed to run it up the chain. Make some calls. I figured he meant the FAA or maybe some military contact. The North Slope has restricted airspace, oil company operations, government installations, plenty of reasons to keep things quiet. He called me back 6 hours later, told me 3 other pilots had reported the same thing over the past 18 months. Same location, same description, same 7-second duration. None of their videos came out. Just static and distortion. Mine was the first clear recording. He asked me to come to a meeting the next morning. Sounded stressed. Said there were people who needed to talk to me. People from outside the company. I should have said no. Should have deleted the video and pretended it never happened. But I was curious, excited even. I thought maybe I stumbled onto some classified military project. Some experimental base or holographic testing ground. I had no idea how wrong I was. The meeting was in a conference room at the airport. 2 men in dark suits. No names. No agency identification. Just serious faces and questions. They wanted to know everything. Exact time, exact location, weather conditions, what I was thinking, what I felt, whether I experienced any unusual sensations before or after the sighting. That last question stuck with me. The way they asked it, like they already knew the answer. I told them the truth, that I felt fine, normal, maybe a little static electricity in the air, but nothing crazy. One of them glanced at the other. A quick look I wasn't supposed to catch. They took my phone. Said they needed to analyze the video. Gave me a receipt and a card with a number to call if I remembered anything else. Told me not to discuss what I'd seen with anyone. National security, standard procedure, all very polite and official. I never got my phone back. The next flight over the North Slope, I watched for it. Kept my eyes locked on that section of tundra. Flew the same route at the same altitude. Same time of day. Nothing, but something felt different. Wrong. Like the air itself had changed texture. My instruments showed minor fluctuations. Compass needle twitching, altimeter drifting by a few feet before correcting itself. Small things, easy to dismiss, except I couldn't dismiss them. I started researching. Spent my nights diving into forums and declassified documents in conspiracy websites. Found dozens of reports going back decades. Pilots seeing things over the Arctic. Cities, structures, lights where no lights should be. Most were dismissed as mirages. Fata Morgana. Temperature inversions creating optical illusions. but some reports had details that didn't fit that explanation. Details that matched what I'd seen. The cities were always modern, contemporary architecture, not some lost civilization or ancient ruins, present-day construction, and they always appeared in the same few locations. Hotspots scattered across the Arctic Circle. One researcher had mapped the sightings, created a pattern. The hotspots formed a perfect hexagon roughly 2,000 miles across, centered on the North Pole. I stared at that map for hours, tried to find a natural explanation, failed. Then I found the deleted posts, people who'd seen the cities and tried to talk about it publicly. Their accounts were scrubbed, threads removed, videos taken down. Not all at once, gradually, quietly, like someone was systematically erasing evidence. I found one cached page, a pilot from Canada describing the same experience. Same city, same 7 seconds. He deposted updates for 3 weeks. Talked about meeting with government officials, about being told to stay quiet, about feeling watched. His last post was a single sentence. They were not cities. Nothing after that. Account deleted. No other online presence I could find. I tried to let it go. Told myself it wasn't my problem. I reported what I saw. Done my duty. Time to move on. But I couldn't stop flying over that spot. Couldn't stop looking down every time I passed over the North Slope. Couldn't stop feeling like something was looking back. The second sighting happened 3 weeks later. Same location. Same impossible city. This time I was ready. Had a new phone. Started recording before it appeared. 11 seconds this time. Not 7. 11. The city was different too. The layout had changed. New buildings in different locations. Like it had been redesigned. Or like I was seeing it at a different point in time. I watched the structures shift and shimmer. Watched shadows fall in directions that didn't match the sun, its position. Watched something moving through the streets. Not vehicles this time. Something else. Crowds, maybe. Patterns of movement that looked almost like a simulation. Then it hit me. The thing that made my stomach drop and my hands go numb. The city wasn't appearing. It was always there. We just couldn't see it most of the time. Do you know how I knew? Some instinct. Some pattern my brain recognized before my conscious mind caught up. But I was certain, absolutely certain, the city existed in the same physical space as the tundra. Overlapping, occupying the same coordinates in a way that shouldn't be possible. We were seeing glimpses, brief moments when whatever separated our world from that place became thin enough to see through. I landed shaking, couldn't file my report, couldn't talk to anyone, just sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching the video over and over. That is when I noticed the people. I thought I was seeing crowds, movement in the streets, but when I zoomed in, frame by frame, I could make out individuals. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They looked human, mostly. Same basic shape, same way of moving, but their shadows were wrong. Some had multiple shadows pointing in different directions. Others had no shadows at all. And a few had shadows that didn't match their bodies. Shadows that were the wrong shape, the wrong size. I felt sick, actually got out of my truck and threw up in the snow. Because I recognized one of the shadows, recognized the distinct shape, the way it moved. It was mine, my shadow, my exact proportions, walking through a city that shouldn't exist, attached to someone who wasn't me. I drove home, packed a bag, told my wife I needed a few days to clear my head. She didn't argue, could see something was wrong. I ended up at a motel outside Talk, spent 2 days staring at my phone, at that video, at my shadow walking through impossible streets. The men in suits found me on the 3rd day, same two from before. They asked how they tracked me down. Just sat across from me in the motel restaurant and ordered coffee like we were old friends catching up. They knew about the second video. They noticed the shadows. One of them slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, dozens of them, different pilots, different sightings, all showing the same thing. People walking through that city with shadows that didn't belong to them. Some of the shadows were identified, matched to real people, politicians, scientists, military personnel, regular folks, all alive. All going about their normal lives while their shadows walked somewhere else. The men explained, in quiet voices, that I needed to stop flying over the North Slope. Stop looking for the city. Stop trying to understand what I'd seen. I asked why. Asked what was really happening. One of them leaned forward. His eyes were tired, sad. He told me that the city had been appearing since the 50s. That every attempt to investigate had failed. No way to reach it. No way to interact with it. just brief glimpses every few weeks or months. He told me that people whose shadows appeared in the city started changing. Slowly, subtle shifts in personality, in behavior, like something was learning to be them. Practicing. He told me that 6 pilots had vanished over the past decade. Just disappeared mid-flight, planes found empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. All of them had seen the city multiple times. All of them had recognized their shadows. I hated the flown since. Called in sick, then quit. My wife thinks I'm having a breakdown. Maybe I am, but every night, I check my shadow. Watch how it moves. Look for signs that it's not quite right. Not quite mine anymore. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, I swear I can see it doing things I'm not doing. Moving when I'm standing still. Gesturing to people who aren't to there. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. The room was dark except for moonlight through the window. My shadow was on the wall, standing, while I lay in bed. It turned its head toward me. I felt it watching, studying. Then the moon went behind a cloud, and it was gone. I am leaving Alaska tonight, driving south and not stopping until I hit the lower 48. But I know it won't matter, because yesterday I saw a video online. Some tourist in Seattle filming the Space Needle. And there, in the background, lasting exactly 7 seconds, was a city that shouldn't exist. Different location, same impossible architecture, same shadows walking streets that aren't there. It is spreading, or maybe it was always everywhere, and we're only now learning to see it. I don't know which possibility terrifies me more. Story 3. Last screening, the face in the film reel blinked at me, and I knew I was going to die. Not right away, not that night, but soon, because whatever was staring out from that strip of 50-year-old celluloid had seen me now, marked me, and things that shouldn't be possible done, to follow rules about what can and cannot cross from film into reality. My name is Tom Brennan. I am 38 years old. I run a small business in Anchorage restoring and converting old media formats. VHS tapes, film reels, slides, whatever people need preserved for posterity. It is boring work most days. Weddings from the 70s, birthday parties, vacation footage of places that don't exist anymore. But 3 days ago, a client brought me something different. The woman, his name was Patricia Moss. She was maybe 70, with white hair and hands that shook when she placed the film canister on my counter. The canister was unmarked except for a piece of masking tape across the top. Someone had written, "Do not watch," in faded pencil. She told me it belonged to her uncle, a projectionist at the old 4th Avenue Theater back in the 50s. He found it in the basement in 1957 and brought it home, convinced it was dangerous. He kept it locked in a safe for 40 years until he died. Patricia inherited it along with the rest of his estate. She wanted me to tell her what was on it, but she wouldn't watch it herself. Her uncle had made her promise, years ago, that she never view the footage. But curiosity had eaten at her for decades. She needed to know what he'd been so afraid of. I should have refused. Should have told her some promises are worth keeping. But business had been slow, and she was offering double my usual rate. So I took the canister, told her I'd have an answer in 2 days, and watched her leave my shop like she was fleeing a crime scene. The film was 16 millimeter, old stock, probably dating back to the early 50s based on the condition of the canister. I set it up on my editing bench that evening after closing. Threaded it carefully through my vintage projector. The film was brittle but intact. I dimmed the lights and pressed play. Nothing but white leader at first. Countdown numbers. 5, 4, 3, 2. Then the image appeared. A forest, spruce trees heavy with snow. The camera was handheld and whoever was operating it was running. The footage was silent, jerky, desperate. Black and white grain gave everything a nightmare quality. The camera swung wildly, catching fragments of the forest floor, gray sky, endless trees. Then I heard them. The cracks, sharp reports like rifle fire echoing through my shop. I jumped in my seat. Heart hammering. The film was silent. There was no soundtrack, but I heard those sounds as clearly as if they were coming from right outside my window. On screen, the trees were splitting, trunks fracturing lengthwise with explosive force. The camera caught one tree erupting just feet away, bark and wood fragments spraying across the lens. Whoever was filming was sobbing now. I couldn't hear it, but I could see it in the way the camera shook. The cracking grew louder, more frantic. My shop windows rattled in their frames. A coffee mug fell off my desk and shattered on the concrete floor. I stood up, ready to shut off the projector. But I couldn't look away from the screen. The forest footage ended abruptly, cut to black, then a new image emerged. A face, close up, so close it filled the entire frame. At first I thought it was a sculpture. The features were too perfect, too symmetrical. Then I realized what I was looking at. Hoarfrost. Thousands of delicate ice crystals arranged in the shape of a human face. Male, I thought, though it was hard to tell. The eyes were dark hollows. The mouth was open slightly, and inside that opening was only blackness. Absolute void. And as I watched, frozen in my chair, the eyes moved. Focused, locked onto something beyond the camera. Locked onto me. The projection lamp flickered. The image on my wall distorted, stretched. And for one impossible moment, the face wasn't on the wall anymore. It was in my shop, three-dimensional, real, hovering in the darkness just beyond the projector. This light. I hit the kill switch. The projector died. The shop plunged into darkness except for the streetlight glow through my windows. My breath came in ragged gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I knocked over my bottle of film cleaner. When I finally got the lights back on, the shop was empty. Just me and my equipment and the film reel still threaded through the projector. I rewound it with trembling fingers and packed it back in its canister. That was 2 nights ago. I haven't slept since. Because the face from the film is following me now. I see it everywhere. In frost patterns on my car windshield. In the condensation on my bathroom mirror. In the ice crystals that form on the inside of my freezer door. Always the same face. Always watching. I tried to research the film. Found old records from the 4th Avenue Theater. In December of 1956, a film crew from California had come to Alaska to shoot a documentary about frontier life. Director named Robert Hayes. Cinematographer named Vincent Ortiz. They hired local guides and headed into the Chugach backcountry during the coldest week in 20 years. Temperatures dropped to -45. The coldest snap in recorded history for that region. The guides made it back. Hayes and Ortiz didn't. Search parties found their camp 3 days later. The tent was shredded. The equipment was scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. And in the center of their campsite was a camera, still loaded with film, sitting upright in the snow like someone had carefully placed it there. Vincent Ortiz's body was found a week later, frozen solid 5 miles from camp. He was on his knees facing north, hands clasped like he was praying. His eyes were open. Frozen tears had formed elaborate ice crystal patterns on his cheeks. Robert Hayes was never found. The film from the camera was developed and screened once at the 4th Avenue Theater. Just once, for the theater owner and the police investigator handling the case. According to the incident report I dug up, both men refused to describe what they'd seen. The theater owner ordered the film locked away. It was never shown again, until Patricia Moss, his uncle, found it in the basement a year later and took it home. The report didn't say what happened to the original screening copy. But I'm betting it's the same reel sitting in my safe right now. The same footage I watched 2 nights ago. The same face that has been stalking me ever since. I called Patricia yesterday morning. Told her I couldn't complete the job. That she should destroy the film without watching it. She started crying on the phone. Said her uncle had told her the same thing. That the film was cursed. That it showed something that shouldn't exist. Something that lived in the deep cold of the Alaskan wilderness. Something that could cross over when someone watched the footage. Use the film as a bridge between its world and ours. Her uncle had watched it once, just a few seconds before he shut it off. But it had been enough. For the rest of his life, he saw the face. In ice, in frost, in his dreams. It never hurt him, never touched him, just watched, waited, like it was studying him. He died of a heart attack at 63. But Patricia said his face in the casket looked terrified, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream. And there was frost on his eyelashes even though the funeral home was heated to 75 degrees. I hung up on her, grabbed the film canister from my safe. I was going to destroy it, burn it, melt it down to nothing. But when I opened the canister, the reel was gone. Just empty space where the film should have been. I locked it in there myself. The safe hadn't been opened. The combination hadn't been changed. But the film had vanished. That's when I heard the cracking sounds outside. I rushed to my shop window and looked out at the parking lot. The temperature was 35 degrees, early April in Anchorage. No reason for anything to be freezing. But the puddles in the parking lot were icing over, and the ice was spreading. racing across the asphalt in crystalline patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost intelligent. The patterns were forming shapes, letters, words written in frost and ice. Come north. I backed away from the window, grabbed my phone to call 911. But the screen was fogged over. When I wiped it clear, I saw my reflection in the black glass. And behind my reflection, standing in my shop, was the figure. 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, made entirely of hoarfrost crystals that somehow held a humanoid shape. The face was the same one from the film. Dark hollow eyes, mouth open to reveal that bottomless void inside. It raised one crystalline hand and pointed north. The gesture was slow, deliberate. A command, not a suggestion. I ran, burst out the back door of my shop and sprinted to my truck. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I was on the highway headed south toward Seward. Away from Anchorage, away from whatever that thing was. But the frost patterns followed me. Every bridge I crossed, every overpass, every puddle on the roadside. The same message forming over and over in ice crystals. Come north. I am in a motel now, 50 miles south of Anchorage. The owner looked at me funny when I checked in. Pale and shaking, pupils dilated with fear. Paid cash for 3 nights even though I dawned. Do you know if it'll last that long? The room is cold. The thermostat says 70 degrees, but my breath fogs when I exhale. Frost is forming on the inside of the windows even though it is 42 degrees outside. And in that frost, I could see it. The face, watching me from multiple panes of glass. Like it surrounding me. Closing in, I looked up the location where Hayes and Ortiz went missing. The coordinates are public record. About 70 miles north of Anchorage in the Taquida Mountains. Remote wilderness. No roads, no cell service, nothing but frozen forest and whatever lives there in the deep cold. The figure wants me to go there. I understand that now. It's been calling people to that place for decades. Maybe longer. Vincent Ortiz went. Patricia's uncle almost went. Others too, probably. People who watched the film and saw the face and heard the invitation written in frost and ice. Come north. Most resist. Most stay in the warmth and safety of civilization, and eventually the face fades. The frost stops forming. The cold retreats, but you never forget. You carry it with you. That knowledge that something ancient and patient is waiting in the wilderness. Something that exists in temperatures humans can survive. Something that wants you to understand what it knows. I could resist too. Could stay here in this motel room with the heater running full blast. Could wait it out. Hope the face gets bored and moves on to someone else. But I already know I want because the cold is inside me now. In my blood. In my bones. Every time I close my eyes, I see that forest from the film. Hear the trees cracking. Feel the desperate need to run towards something I done. Do you understand? Vincent Ortiz filmed his own death. Shot footage of himself running through those woods while whatever lived there hunted him. And at the end, when he couldn't run anymore, he turned the camera on his pursuer. Captured that face made of hoarfrost. That impossible entity that shouldn't exist. And in doing so, he gave it a way to reach beyond the wilderness. To touch people like me who would watch that footage decades later. To plant the cold in their minds like a seed that would grow and spread until they couldn't ignore it anymore. The cracking sounds are starting again. Right outside my motel room. I can hear the pavement splitting. Ice forming in impossible patterns. Letters appearing in frost on my window. Come north, come home, come see what we know. My truck keys are in my hand. I packed cold weather gear without really meaning to. Tent, sleeping bag rated to -40. Emergency supplies. Like some part of me always knew this was how it would end. The coordinates are saved in my GPS. 70 miles north. Then another 20 on foot into terrain that killed 2 experienced filmmakers in 1956. Into cold that goes deeper than temperature. Into something that has been waiting decades for someone else to watch the film. Someone else to see the face. Someone else to receive the invitation. I am going. Not because I want to, but because I don't have a choice anymore. The cold owns me now. It is in every breath, every heartbeat, every thought. And maybe that's what happened to Robert Hayes. Maybe he made it to wherever that place is. Maybe he is still there, preserved in the deep cold, waiting alongside whatever spoke to him through frost and ice. Another face for the next film reel. Another invitation for the next person foolish enough to watch. The motel room is freezing now. The walls are covered in frost patterns. Complex geometric designs that hurt to look at. That suggest dimensions and angles that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. And in the center of the largest pattern, written in crystals so delicate they might blow away with a breath, are words I can barely read. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. Welcome home. I'm leaving now. Heading north while I still remember what warmth feels like. While I can still recall my name and my life and everything I'm leaving behind. Before the cold takes all of that away and replaces it with something else. Something older. Something that's been waiting in the Alaskan wilderness since long before humans came here. If anyone finds this, Dawn, to look for me. Dawn, to watch any film reels from the 4th Avenue Theater. Dawn, to try to understand what happened to Vincent Ortiz or Robert Hayes or Patricia, his uncle. And if you see frost-forming faces on your windows, Dawn, to study them too carefully. Dawn, to try to make out the features. Because once you see it clearly, once you recognize what is looking back at you, it is already too late. The cold has you, and it never lets go. I can see it in my rearview mirror now as I drive north. The figure, standing in the motel parking lot, watching me leave. And I swear, if hoarfrost could smile, that's what it's doing. Smiling because it knows I'm coming. Finally coming home. Story 4. Last hunt of the McCandless trapper, I bought a dead man, his cabin, and his journal told me why I should never have come here. My name is Tom Brennan. I am a freelance writer from Seattle, 42 years old, recently divorced, looking for somewhere quiet to finish my book about the Alaskan wilderness. When I found the listing for a remote cabin near Healy, just 30 miles from where Chris McCandless died in that abandoned bus, I thought I'd found the perfect place. Isolated, authentic, cheap. The realtor mentioned the previous owner had disappeared years ago. An old trapper named Vernon Hayes who lived out here since the 70s. His body was never found, and after 7 years, the state declared him legally dead. His distant relatives wanted nothing to do with the property, so it sat empty until I made an offer they couldn't refuse. I moved in on a gray October morning. The cabin was solid, one room with a loft, a wood stove, and furniture carved by hand from local timber. Vernon's possessions were still there. Traps hanging on the walls, snowshoes by the door, a rifle above the fireplace. The relatives had taken anything valuable, but they left behind the life of a man who chosen solitude over civilization. I spent the first week settling in, chopping wood, learning the rhythms of this place. My nearest neighbor was 12 miles away. Cell service didn't exist out here. I had a satellite phone for emergencies and enough supplies to last through winter. This was exactly what I needed. Space to think, space to write, space to forget about Susan and the wreckage of my marriage. On my 8th night, I found the journal. It was wedged between the floorboards in the loft, hidden deliberately or maybe just lost over time. A leather-bound notebook, water-stained and worn, filled with Vernon's cramped handwriting. The entries were dated, starting in September of 1992 and ending abruptly in February of 1993. The same winter Chris McCandless died in that bus 20 miles from here. I started reading by lamplight, and immediately I knew something was wrong. The early entries were normal enough. Notes about trap lines, weather conditions, supplies needed. Vernon wrote about hearing that a young man had moved into the abandoned Fairbanks bus, how he considered checking on him but decided against interfering. Then, in late October, the tone shifted. Vernon described finding tracks near his cabin. Moose tracks, massive ones, indicating an animal that must have weighed close to 2,000 pounds. He'd been trapping and hunting in Alaska for 30 years and had never seen tracks that large. He became obsessed with finding this moose, convinced it would provide enough meat to last him through 2 winters. He started tracking it, following those enormous hoofprints through the snow, into the deep spruce forests, across frozen streams. But the tracks were strange. They appear in one location, then vanish completely in the middle of open snowfields where there was no cover, no way for an animal that size to disappear. Vernon would find them again miles away, heading in a completely different direction. He thought at first he was tracking multiple animals, but the tracks were identical. Same size, same gait pattern, same distinctive chip in the left front hoof. It was one moose, impossibly large, that somehow moved through the wilderness like a ghost. By November, Vernon's entries had become frantic. He'd seen the moose 3 times, always at a distance, always at twilight. He described it as the largest animal he ever witnessed, standing at least 8 feet at the shoulder, with antlers that spread wider than a man's outstretched arms. But what disturbed him most were the eyes. He wrote that the moose had watched him, not with the normal wariness of wild animals, but with something else. Intelligence, awareness, recognition, like it knew exactly what he was and what he wanted, and it was playing with him, leading him deeper into the wilderness, away from safety, away from reason. I remember sitting in that loft, reading by lamplight, feeling the temperature drop as the wind picked up outside. Vernon, its words had a desperate quality, like he was trying to convince himself that what he was experiencing was real, that he wasn't losing his mind in the isolation and darkness of an Alaskan winter. In December, he wrote about finding the moose standing in a clearing at dawn. He raised his rifle, had a perfect shot, and froze. Because the moose had turned its head and looked directly at him, and in that moment Vernon swore he saw something in those eyes that wasn't the animal. Something that understood what a rifle was, what death meant, what fear felt like. He didn't take the shot. He couldn't explain why. Just that every instinct screamed at him to lower the weapon and back away slowly. So he did. After that encounter, things escalated. Vernon started hearing sounds around his cabin at night. Heavy footsteps in the snow, breathing outside his door, the scratch of antlers against the walls. But when he looked outside, there was nothing. Just darkness and endless snow and those massive tracks circling his cabin like a predator sizing up its prey. He wrote about his supplies running low, about how he should have made the trip to Healy to resupply but couldn't bring himself to leave. Something kept him in the cabin, waiting, watching for the moose. He abandoned his other trap lines, stopped hunting smaller game. His entire existence had narrowed to this obsession with the impossible animal that moved through the wilderness like it owned every inch of it. The entries from January were harder to read. Vernon's handwriting had deteriorated, lines slanting across the page, words sometimes trailing off mid-sentence. He described dreams where he was the one being hunted, where he ran through endless snow while something massive and patient followed his trail, never rushing, never tiring, just persistently closing the distance. He wrote about seeing the moose near the Fairbanks bus where that young man McCandless was staying. How he hiked over there one morning and found those enormous tracks circling the bus, pacing around it like the moose was curious about the human inside. Vernon had knocked on the bus door, planning to warn the kid, but nobody answered. He left, feeling like he failed some responsibility he couldn't articulate. The final entries, from February, were barely coherent. Vernon was convinced the moose wasn't real in any conventional sense. He found evidence that other trappers and hunters had encountered it over the years. References in old journals and letters from the 40s and 50s, describing the same massive animal, the same intelligent eyes, the same vanishing tracks. Like it had been here forever, moving through the wilderness, watching the humans who dared to venture into its territory. The last entry was dated February 20th. Vernon wrote that he finally understood. The moose wasn't hunting him for food or territory. It was hunting him for the same reason he'd been hunting it. Because the challenge demanded completion. Because some pursuits, once begun, could only end one way. He wrote that he was going out to track it one final time. That he either return with the greatest trophy of his life or he wouldn't return at all. That if anyone found this journal, they should know he made his choice willingly. The hunt was everything. The hunt was all that mattered. The journal ended there. No more entries, just blank pages. I sat in that loft for a long time, trying to rationalize what I read. Vernon had clearly been suffering from cabin fever, isolation psychosis, something that made him fixate on a normal animal and invest it with supernatural qualities. The human mind does strange things in extreme solitude. I read about it. Hallucinations, paranoia, delusions. That had to be the explanation. But when I climbed down from the loft and looked out the window into the darkness, I saw them. Tracks in the fresh snow. Enormous moose tracks, leading right up to my cabin, circling it twice, then heading off into the trees. And there, where the animal had stood directly in front of my door, the snow was packed down like something had waited there for a long time. Watching, listening, I told myself it was coincidence. Moose came through this area. Big ones. Alaska grew them large. There was nothing supernatural about tracks in the snow. I was letting Vernon's delusional journal get into my head. But I checked Vernon's rifle above the fireplace, made sure it was loaded, and I didn't sleep that night. The tracks appeared every morning after that, always circling my cabin, always stopping at the same spot in front of the door. I tried following them once, but they vanished after half a mile, disappearing in the middle of an open meadow exactly like Vernon had described. No trees to hide behind. No rocky ground to obscure prints. They just ended, like the animal had evaporated into thin air. I started researching Chris McCandless more carefully, reading accounts of his time in that bus, looking for any mention of wildlife encounters. And I found something in one of the books about him, a note from his journal, written in January of 1992, about seeing a massive moose near the bus. He'd written that it was the largest animal he'd ever seen, and that it had watched him with an unnerving intensity. He thought about trying to hunt it, but decided against it, feeling for reasons he couldn't. He explained that the moose was somehow off limits, sacred or protected by something he didn't understand. McCandless died in August of that year, poisoned by wild potato seeds or starvation or some combination of factors that trapped him in that bus. But I wondered now if there had been something else, some reason he stayed there even when he was dying, even when he could have tried to walk out for help. Had the moose been watching him too, circling that bus the way it now circled my cabin? November came, and the tracks got closer. They approached my door, pressed against it. I could hear breathing outside some nights, low and slow and steady. The scratch of antlers against wood. But when I threw open the door with the rifle ready, there was nothing. Just darkness and snow and those tracks leading away into the forest. I tried to leave, packed my truck, loaded my supplies, planning to drive to Healy and never come back. But 3 miles down the road, I found it standing in my path. The moose, Vernon had exaggerated. It was impossibly massive, towering over my truck, antlers spanning at least 10 feet. But it was the eyes that stopped me cold. They caught my headlights and reflected them back with an intelligence that no animal should possess. Human intelligence. More than human, ancient and patient and utterly focused. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I could see my breath fogging in the cab. Could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The moose didn't. He moved. Didn't. He threatened. Just stood there, blocking the road, making its message clear. You're not leaving. Not yet. Not until this is finished. I backed up slowly, turned around, drove back to the cabin. And I understood then what Vernon had understood. This wasn't about danger or survival. The moose wasn't going to attack me or harm me. It was about something deeper, about the relationship between hunter and hunted, about obsession and wilderness and the way some challenges grab hold of you and don't let go until they consumed everything you are. They've been here for 6 weeks now. I tracked the moose during the day, following its impossible trail through the snow. I lose it, find it again, watch it watching me from distant ridges. At night it circles my cabin, and I sit by the fire reading Vernon, this journal over and over, understanding more each time. Other people have encountered this animal. I am certain of it. Trappers and hunters going back decades, maybe centuries. Some left, some stayed, some, like Vernon, went out one day and never came back. And Chris McCandless? I think he saw it too. I think it watched him die in that bus, observing this young man who did come to Alaska seeking something he couldn't name. Maybe the moose was what he'd been looking for all along. The wilderness made manifest, the ultimate test of will and purpose. I'm writing this down because I'm going out tomorrow. Taking Vernon, his rifle, following those tracks one more time. They accepted what this is. The moose I sent to haunting me. It is offering me something. A choice, a completion. The same choice it offered Vernon and maybe offered McCandless. You can live your whole life never fully committing to anything. Never pursuing something with absolute dedication. Never allowing yourself to be consumed by a challenge that has no rational purpose. That is safe. That is reasonable. Or you can surrender to the obsession. Follow it wherever it leads, knowing you might not come back, but understanding that the pursuit itself is the point. That some hunts aren't about the trophy. They are about transformation. The tracks are outside my door right now. Fresh ones, still steaming in the cold morning air. The moose is waiting for me. Has been waiting since before I arrived. Since before Vernon. Since before any of us came to this wilderness thinking we could conquer it or escape into it or find something we lost. I understand now why Vernon hid this journal, why he didn't want anyone to find it until he was gone. Because you can explain this to people who haven experienced it. They'll call it delusion or psychosis or cabin fever. They'll rationalize and dismiss and forget. But if you, reading this, they found this cabin and this journal after I'm gone, you need to know something. The moose is real. It is out there in the wilderness, moving through the snow, watching the humans who venture into its territory. And sometimes, for reasons no one understands, it chooses someone. When it does, you have two choices. Run, leave, return to civilization and safety and sanity, or accept the invitation, follow the tracks, complete the hunt. I'm choosing the hunt. Not because I'm brave or crazy or suicidal, but because I finally understand what Vernon understood. Some things demand completion. Some pursuits, once they grabbed hold of your soul, won't let go until you see them through to whatever end awaits. The sun is coming up. The tracks lead north, toward the deep wilderness where few people ever go. I'm taking the rifle, a pack with minimal supplies, and Vernon's journal. If I come back, I'll add to these pages. If I don't, whoever finds this will at least know what happened. The last hunt of the McCandless Trapper ISNT over. It was never about Vernon or Chris or me. It is about something older, something that has always been here, waiting in the wilderness, offering a choice to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to accept it. The moose is calling. I can hear it, not with my ears, but with something deeper. And I am answering, not because I have to, but because, like Vernon, like maybe Chris McCandless, they realize that this is what I came here to find. The one hunt that matters. The one pursuit that strips away everything else and reveals what you really are beneath all the fear and doubt and safety. I'm ready. The tracks await. And somewhere out there in the endless snow, the moose is waiting too. If you're still listening, thank you. Midnight Whispers lives on your subscriptions and your stories. So hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Alaska's dark has a way of finding people, even far away. Story 5, Ghost Current. I should have listened to the old man at the fuel dock. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand, and when I asked him which stretch of the Kuskokwim had the best fishing that time of year, he just stared at my boat and shook his head. Said there was a section about 15 miles upriver where the water wasn't right. Said it hadn't been right since 1987, when 3 commercial fishermen went missing in calm weather. Their boat turned up 2 days later, spinning in circles near the bank, engine still running, but the hull was covered in something he wouldn't describe. He just looked at his ruined hand and told me to stay south of the old trapper's cabin. I nodded, thanked him, and forgot about it the moment I pulled away from the dock. This was my 3rd summer guiding in Alaska, and I heard 100 stories just like that one. Every river had its legends, every lake its monster, every stretch of forest its missing persons. The wilderness was dangerous enough without inventing ghosts. I had a client paying $2,000 for a weekend of king salmon fishing, and I wasn't going to let some superstitious old-timer dictate where I dropped my lines. The weather that morning was perfect. Overcast but warm, the kind of gray sky that brings fish to the surface. My client, a software executive from Seattle named Marcus, spent the first hour taking photos for his Instagram while I navigated upstream. He was the typical type. Expensive gear he never used before this trip. A Patagonia vest that still had the tags tucked inside. He talked constantly about his divorce, his stock options, his meditation app. I made the appropriate sounds and watched the water. The Kuskokwim is a strange river. It runs brown with glacial silt most of the year, winding through millions of acres of untouched wilderness. The villages along its length are few and far between, connected only by boat and bush plane. In some places the river spreads out wide and shallow. In others it narrows into deep channels that run fast and cold even in July. The section where I planned to fish was one of the deep parts, where the current ran steady and the salmon staged before their final push upstream. We passed the old trapper's cabin around 10 in the morning. I noticed it because of the way Marcus suddenly stopped talking. He was looking at the collapsed structure on the west bank, and his face had gone pale. He asked me what it was, and I told him. Just an abandoned cabin, probably 50 years old, maybe older. There were dozens like it up and down the river. Trappers used to work this country hard before the fur market collapsed. Now their camps rotted back into the forest. Marcus asked if people ever stayed in them. I said no, not anymore. He nodded but kept staring at it until we rounded the next bend. That It's when I felt it. The boat lurched sideways, not violently, but wrong, like something had grabbed the hull and pulled. I checked my engine, but the RPMs were steady. The current looked normal. I adjusted our angle and kept going, but Marcus had noticed too. He asked if we hit something, and I lied and said it was just a shallow spot. 3 minutes later, it happened again. This time the boat swung hard to port, and I had to throttle up to keep us straight. The river looked exactly the same, brown water flowing downstream at its usual pace, but my boat was fighting against something that wasn't visible on the surface. I could feel it through the steering wheel, a sideways pressure, constant and cold. Marcus wasn't too stupid. He asked if we should turn back. I should have said yes. Instead, I told him it was just a weird eddy, probably caused by the current hitting a submerged rock shelf. I'd seen stranger things. We fish for an hour and then head downstream. I said it confidently, like I knew what I was talking about. I didn't. The pressure got worse as we continued upriver. I had to fight the wheel constantly, adjusting our angle to compensate for a pull that seemed to be coming from the north, perpendicular to the flow. My GPS showed the river running straight, but my boat wanted to go sideways. The engine began to whine. Not loud, just a slight change in pitch that made my stomach tighten. When we reached the spot where I wanted to fish, I couldn't hold our position. I tried anchoring, but the boat swung in an arc that didn't match the current. The anchor line went taut at an angle that made no sense. Marcus stopped pretending to be calm and asked what was happening. I told him I didn't know. We were both staring at the water now, and that when I saw them. Branches, just beneath the surface, pale and twisted, moving slowly past the boat. Except they weren't moving downstream. They were moving sideways, in the same direction as the pull. I leaned over the gunwale and looked deeper. The water was murky, but I could see more of them down there. Not branches, trees, old trees, submerged and swaying in a current that ran perpendicular to reality. Marcus saw them too. He made a sound in his throat, something between a gasp and a whimper. I pulled up the anchor and tried to start us back downstream. The engine responded, but the boat barely moved. We were caught in something now, held by a force that didn't care about horsepower or physics. I pushed the throttle to maximum, and the boat crept forward a few feet before the engine stuttered. Then it died completely. The silence was immediate and total. No engine noise, no wind, no birds. Just the soft sound of water moving against the hull, except it was moving the wrong direction. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The battery was full that morning. I checked it myself. Marcus asked what we should do, and I didn't answer because I didn't know. That's when the boat started to turn, slowly at first, then faster. We were spinning in place, caught in a rotation that had nothing to do with the visible current. I grabbed the oars from the emergency kit and tried to paddle us toward shore, but the moment the blade hit the water, something yanked it sideways with such force that the handle was ripped from my hands. I watched the oar disappear beneath the surface, pulled down and away by the submerged forest I'd seen earlier. Marcus was breathing hard now, his expensive sunglasses reflecting the gray sky. The boat spun faster. I tried the second oar, bracing myself this time, but the same thing happened. One moment I was holding it, the next it was gone, torn from my grip like a child's toy. My palms were bleeding from the friction. The boat completed another rotation, and I saw something that made my throat close. The water near the northern bank wasn't too brown anymore. It was clear, perfectly, impossibly clear, and beneath that clarity I could see the forest. Not a few scattered trees, but an entire submerged woodland stretching into the depths. The trees were white, bone white, their branches swaying in that wrong current. And there were things tangled in those branches, dark shapes that might have been debris or might have been something else. Marcus saw it too. He started to scream. The boat lurched sideways again, harder this time, and we both fell against the port side. The spin stopped. For 3 seconds we sat there, breathing hard, staring at each other. Then the boat began to move. Not spinning now, moving laterally across the river, pulled toward that clear water and the white forest beneath it. I tried the engine again. Dead. I grabbed my radio and called for help, but there was only static. Marcus kept asking what was happening. What was pulling us? What were those things in the trees? I didn't answer because I was watching the water change. We were entering the clear section now, and the transition was sharp, like crossing from one world into another. Behind us, the Kuskokwim ran brown and normal. Around us, the water was transparent as glass, and the cold that rose from it made my bones ache. The forest below was massive. Trees that must have been 60 feet tall. Their roots planted in silt I couldn't see. Their branches reaching up toward a surface they did never break. The bark was that bone-white color, smooth and almost luminescent. And woven through those branches were ropes. Dozens of them, hundreds, old fishing nets, anchor lines, lengths of chain. And caught in those ropes were the things I'd seen before. Boats. Dozens of boats, from small skiffs to 30-foot commercial vessels, all suspended in the submerged forest like ornaments. Their hulls were intact but pale, covered in the same white substance that coated the trees. And inside those boats I could see shadows that might have been seats or equipment or bodies. Marcus vomited over the side. Our boat was being pulled deeper into the clear water, away from the brown current, away from anything normal. The cold was unbearable now. My breath came out in clouds. The metal hull was freezing to the touch, and the forest kept getting closer, rising up beneath us as we were pulled down. That's when I realized we weren't just moving sideways. We were sinking. The boat should have been floating. There was no leak, no damage. But the waterline was climbing up the hull, inch by inch, as if gravity itself had changed direction. The clear water poured over the gunwale in a sheet, and it was so cold it burned. Marcus was clawing at his life jacket, hyperventilating, asking me to do something. I grabbed him and told him to be still. The boat was half submerged now, tilting at an angle that matched the pull. We were being dragged down and sideways simultaneously, following the path of that phantom current. The white trees were only 20 feet below us, their branches reaching up. I could see details now that I wished I couldn't. The ropes weren't just ropes. They were organic, like roots or veins, growing out of the trees themselves and wrapping around everything they caught. And they were moving, reaching up toward our boat with a patience that was somehow worse than speed. Marcus jumped. I don't know if he panicked or if he thought he could swim to shore, but he went over the side into that freezing clear water. I shouted his name and lunged for him, but he was already sinking. Not drowning, sinking. The water pulled him down and sideways, his expensive life jacket useless against that current. I watched him descend into the white forest, his arms and legs thrashing, his mouth open in a silent scream. The branches caught him gently, almost tenderly, and began to wrap around his body. I pulled back from the edge as the boat tilted further. The water was up to my knees now, so cold I couldn't feel my legs. I had maybe 30 seconds before the boat went under completely. I looked toward shore, measured the distance, 70 feet to the brown water, to the normal current. I was a strong swimmer. I made longer distances in colder water, but I'd seen what happened to Marcus. The boat lurched again, and suddenly I was underwater. The cold was a physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs. I kicked for the surface, broke through, gasped. The boat was gone, pulled down into the forest. I could see it below me, settling into the branches next to all the others. And I could see Marcus, wrapped in those white tendrils, his face pale and his eyes wide open. He was still alive. I swam, hard and fast toward the brown water, toward the real current. But the pull was incredible. For every stroke forward, I slid 2 feet sideways and down. The white forest rose up beneath me, branches reaching, those organic ropes extending. I kicked one away from my ankle and kept swimming. My lungs were screaming. My muscles were seizing. The cold was draining me with every second. But I could see the edge where clear water met brown. 20 feet, 15. The color change was like a wall, and if I could just reach it, if I could just cross back into the real world, I'd be safe. 10 feet, something wrapped around my leg. I looked down and saw one of those pale tendrils coiled around my calf, tugging gently downward. I kicked at it, but it tightened. Another one caught my arm. I thrashed and fought and burned the last of my oxygen, pulling myself forward. The brown water was right there, inches away. I could see the silt particles swirling in the normal current. I reached out and my hand crossed the boundary. The pull vanished instantly. The tendrils released me as if burned. I surged forward into the brown water and the cold retreated and the normal current caught me and pulled me downstream. I didn't stop swimming until my hands hit gravel. I crawled onto the bank and collapsed, coughing river water and shaking so hard my vision blurred. When I could finally stand, I looked back upriver. The clear water was gone. The entire stretch of river looked normal. brown and steady and unremarkable. I searched for any sign of what I'd seen, but there was nothing. No clear section, no white forest, no suspended boats. Just the Kuskokwim flowing like it always had. I walked downstream for 6 hours before a fishing boat picked me up. I told them I decapsized, that my client had drowned, that it was an accident. They called the authorities and a search team was dispatched. They found nothing. No boat, no body, no evidence of what happened. The river kept its secrets. I never guided again. Couldn't. Every time I see brown water, I feel that sideways pull, that impossible cold. I dream about the white forest and all those boats hanging in its branches. I dream about Marcus, wrapped in pale tendrils, his eyes open and aware. But mostly I dream about what I saw in those last seconds before I crossed back. Other people, dozens of them, suspended in the trees alongside the boats, wrapped in those organic ropes, their bodies pale and their eyes open. Some of them looked fresh, others looked ancient, but they were all still alive in a way that didn't require breathing. And they were all staring up at the surface, watching for the next person to drift into that wrong current. The old man at the fuel dock never told me what happened to his fingers. But I know now, he got close enough to see what I saw, close enough to feel that pull, and smart enough to cut himself free before the white forest could claim him. I wasn't that smart. I made it out, but part of me is still there, floating in that clear water, feeling those tendrils reach up through the cold. The Kuskokwim looks normal on every map. Fishermen guide clients through that stretch every summer. Most of them never notice the sideways pull, never see the clear water, never sink into the white forest below. But some do, and when they do, the river adds them to its collection. I drove past the fuel dock last week. Someone new is working there now. The old man is gone, but hanging on the wall behind the counter, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A photo, faded in water damage, showing a boat suspended in white branches, and a man wrapped in pale tendrils, his hand reaching up toward a surface he did never reach. He was missing 2 fingers. The river remembers everyone who has seen the ghost current, and eventually it pulls them all back. I can feel it now, even hundreds of miles from Alaska. That sideways tug, that cold that seeps through warm air, the white branches reaching up through reality itself. It's only a matter of time before I go back. Before I finish what I started when I ignored that old man, this warning, and crossed into water that wasn't to right. The ghost current of the Kuskokwim is patient. It doesn't need to chase. It just waits in the deep places where the river flows sideways into forever. And sooner or later, everyone who has touched it comes home. Story 6. Thing in the Glacier. Veins. I helped seal something inside the Mendenhall Glacier that should never be released. And every day I pray the ice keeps melting slowly enough that we have time to figure out what to do when it finally breaks free. My name is James Whitmore. I am a glaciologist. Or I was until August of last year when I quit the field entirely and took a job teaching high school earth science in Phoenix. As far from ice as I could get, people ask me why I left such a promising career, why I abandoned 15 years of research, why I refuse to even look at photographs of glaciers anymore. I tell them I burned out, got tired of the cold, wanted to change. All lies. The truth is I saw something in the ice near Juneau that changed everything I thought I understood about our planet. About what lives here with us. About what has been waiting, frozen and patient, for the right conditions to wake up. We were conducting routine climate research in July, drilling core samples from the Mendenhall to track historical temperature fluctuations. Standard procedure. We'd done it hundreds of times at dozens of glaciers. Drill down, extract a cylinder of ice, study the layers like rings in a tree trunk. Each layer tells you about the year it formed, temperature, atmospheric composition, volcanic activity. The ice remembers everything. Our drill hit something unexpected at 420 meters down. The bit suddenly dropped, the resistance changing from solid ice to something softer. Not water, not air, something else. The drill pulled back up covered in a thin film of translucent material that looked organic. Almost like mucus. Dr. Sarah Chen, our team leader, collected a sample while I prepped the core extraction equipment. She sealed the mucus in a sterile container and slid it into the portable freezer unit we used for preserving samples. Standard protocol, everything by the book, but when we pulled up the core sample itself, that is when we knew something was very wrong. The ice cylinder was 4 meters long, clear and perfect for the first 3.5 meters. Then it changed. The bottom half meter was laced with what looked like veins, thin tubes running through the ice in complex, branching patterns. They were translucent but had a faint reddish tint, and when I looked closely, I could see movement inside them. Slow, pulsating, like something flowing through organic tissue. Sarah's hands were shaking as she photographed the sample. She studied glacial ice from every continent, published dozens of papers. Never seen anything like this. None of us had. We set up the analysis tent and brought the core inside, maintaining it at -20°C to prevent melting. Under better lighting and magnification, the vein structures became even more disturbing. They weren't random. They formed a network, a system. The tubes connected to each other at precise angles, creating junctions and pathways that looked almost engineered. And they were definitely moving. The pulsations were regular, rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowed down by the cold. Something was flowing through those tubes, something that had been frozen for thousands of years but wasn't quite dead. Sarah made the call that would doom us all. She decided to thaw a small section, just a few centimeters, just enough to analyze the organic material under a microscope. She was careful, used a controlled warming chamber, brought the temperature up 1 degree per hour. Professional, methodical. The tubes began moving faster as they warmed. The pulsations intensified, and at -5°C, they started growing. I watched through the chamber window as the vein structure extended, pushing new tubes out through the ice like roots searching for soil. They moved with purpose, with intention, pressing against the walls of the warming chamber, testing them, probing for weakness. Sarah shut down the experiment immediately, started the refreeze process, but it was too late. One of the tubes had found a hairline crack in the chamber seal. It squeezed through, thinner than a human hair, and dropped onto the floor of the tent. The moment it touched the warmer air outside the chamber, it began to expand, thicken, turned from translucent to a darker red, and it started moving across the floor toward the nearest heat source. Toward me, I stumbled backward, knocking over equipment. The tube followed. It moved like a worm, contracting and extending, but faster than any earthworm I'd ever seen. And it was growing, already as thick as a pencil, getting thicker by the second. Sarah grabbed a propane torch we used for melting ice samples, hit the tube with direct flame. It recoiled, writhing, but didn't die. Didn't even seem particularly damaged. It just changed direction, started moving toward her instead. That's when we realized there were more of them. While we'd been focused on the one on the floor, dozens of others had squeezed through the crack. They were spreading across the tent, moving toward us, toward our body heat, with single-minded determination. We ran, left everything, the samples, the equipment, the data, just grabbed our coats and ran out into the July afternoon. Behind us, the tent was moving, bulging. The tubes inside were growing exponentially, feeding on the warmer air, getting thicker and longer and more active. The tent collapsed as we reached the parking area. Hundreds of tubes spilled out, red and glistening, writhing across the ice like some kind of obscene root system. They spread in all directions, but most of them came toward us. Drawn by our heat, our movement, our living flesh, one of them reached my boot before I could get in the truck. It wrapped around my ankle, and I felt it through the leather. Cold at first, then rapidly warming as it tried to burrow. Tried to get to skin. To get inside, Sarah smashed it with a rock hammer. The tube split open, spilling fluid that steamed in contact with the ice. But the severed ends kept moving. Both pieces tried to continue toward us independently. We drove back to Juneau doing 90 on roads meant for 50. Called the Forest Service, the CDC, the National Science Foundation, anyone we could think of who might know what to do. By the time the response team arrived 8 hours later, the tubes had spread across nearly 100 square meters of glacier surface. Some were as thick as garden hoses. Others had burrowed back down into the ice, disappearing into the glacier's depths. The response was immediate and extreme. They evacuated everyone within 5 miles, brought in specialists wearing hazmat suits, set up a perimeter, and after 3 days of assessment, they made the decision to seal the borehole. They used shaped charges, military-grade explosives designed to cause precise collapses. They dropped them down the hole. We de-drilled and detonated them in sequence, bringing down thousands of tons of ice, burying the vein network, cutting it off from the surface. The official report said we encountered a previously unknown extremophile organism, bacteria or possibly a fungus adapted to survive in glacial ice. Potentially dangerous but contained. The site was marked as biohazardous and restricted. But I saw the classified documents before I quit. I saw what the specialists really found when they examined the samples we left behind. Those weren't to random organisms. That wasn't to bacteria or fungus. The vein structure had organs, specialized tissues, something analogous to a nervous system. It was a single organism, a massive one, and the tubes we found were just the smallest capillaries of something much, much larger living deep inside the glacier. The core samples from the deepest part of the borehole showed the vein network extending down at least 200 meters below where we drilled, growing thicker and more complex the deeper it went. And the ice down there was old, 40,000 years old, maybe more. This thing had been frozen since the last ice age, dormant, preserved, and we woken it up. The specialists estimated that at current melt rates, the Mendenhall Glacier would lose enough mass to expose deeper ice layers within 20 to 30 years. Maybe less if warming continues to accelerate. And when that happens, when the ice around that organism thins enough, when summer temperatures reach deep enough, it will thaw naturally. All of it, not just a few centimeters in a controlled lab. The entire network, kilometers of living tissue that has been waiting in the frozen dark for 40 millennia, patient and hungry and ready to spread. I dream about it sometimes, about what happens when it finally breaks free, about whether it is alone or if there are others like it frozen in glaciers around the world, all of them waiting for the ice to release them, about whether they were native to Earth or came from somewhere else, frozen into comets that crashed here millions of years ago. Mostly I dream about the way those tubes moved, the purpose, the intelligence, the way they sought out warmth and life with such single-minded determination. And I wonder what they were looking for, what they were trying to reach, whether they were trying to burrow into us to feed or to reproduce or to simply get warm, or whether they were trying to get inside us for some other reason entirely. To control us, to wear us, to use our bodies as vessels for something that can, to survive in open air but needs living flesh to spread. The dynamite bought us time. Maybe a decade, maybe two, but the glacier keeps melting. Every summer it retreats a little more. Every year the ice gets thinner. And somewhere deep in the Mendenhall, buried under thousands of tons of ice and rock, that network of veins is still there. Still alive. Still waiting for the day when the frozen walls that contain it finally disappear and it can spread across the warming world like an infection. I hope I'm dead before that happens. I hope we all are. Because I've seen what those things can do when they were just a few centimeters long. And I've seen the scans of what waits deeper down. Tubes as thick as tree trunks. Masses of tissue the size of houses. All of it connected. All of it part of one enormous organism that we barely touched the edge of. We didn't discover a new species that day in July. We discovered something that was here long before us. Something that ruled this planet during the Ice Age and got frozen out of existence when the world warmed. And now the world is warming again. The ice is melting. The seals are breaking. And soon, very soon, it is going to come back. Story 7. Thing in the bore, I stopped counting the days after the first week. When you re-stuck in Alaska during the off-season, time becomes something else entirely. Something that stretches and compresses like taffy pulled too thin. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a wildlife photographer from Portland, and 3 weeks ago I drove up to Alaska chasing a story about glacial melting. What I found instead was something that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, listening to every creak in my apartment like it might be coming for me again. The locals in Anchorage told me about Turn Again Arm on my second night there. A bartender with weathered hands and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much pointed to a faded map on the wall. The Arm is this long, narrow stretch of water that runs about 40 miles from Anchorage, famous for having one of the most extreme tidal ranges in the world. 40-foot swings. The water rushes in so fast it creates these waves called tidal bores that surge up the inlet like liquid mountains. But that wasn't what made my skin prickle. It was what he said next, leaning close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. Don, to go near the mudflats when the bore is coming. And if you hear something calling from the water, you run. You don't, to look back, and you sure as hell don't, to answer. I laughed it off, urban legend stuff. Every remote place has its monster stories. Something to scare tourists and keep the locals entertained during the endless winter nights. I should have listened. The first time I saw a Turn Again Arm was on a gray morning that felt like the sun had forgotten how to rise properly. The water was out, exposing miles of gleaming mudflats that stretched toward the mountains like the surface of an alien planet. The mud wasn't ordinary. It had this strange, almost glossy quality. And I learned later that it is some of the most dangerous in the world. Glacial silt mixed with clay that turns into quicksand the moment you step on it. People have died out there, stuck and helpless as the tide rushed back in. I set up my camera gear near a pullout along the Seward Highway. The landscape was stunning in a desolate way. Mountains rising sharp against the low clouds. The exposed arm looking like a wound in the earth. I shot for maybe an hour, getting footage of the retreating waterline and the way the light played across the mud. That's when I noticed the smell. It came on gradually, carried by the wind. Not the clean salt smell you'd expect near the ocean. This was something organic and wrong. Like meat left too long in a warm place. Like the inside of something that should have stayed closed. I lowered my camera and scanned the mudflats. Nothing moved except the wind pushing ripples across puddles of standing water. But the smell grew stronger, and with it came a sound. Low, rhythmic, almost like breathing, but too deep, too resonant to come from anything human. My hands started shaking. I packed up my gear faster than I needed to and drove back toward Anchorage, telling myself I was being ridiculous. That it was just wind moving through rocks, or maybe a dead seal somewhere on the flats decomposing in the cold. But I kept going back. Something pulled me there. Professional curiosity, I told myself. This was the story, the extreme environment, the dangerous beauty of it. The second visit was 2 days later. Early morning again, but this time I came prepared. Better lenses, recording equipment to capture ambient sound. I wanted everything. I parked at a different spot, closer to where the bore typically forms, and hiked down a rocky trail until I was maybe 30 yards from the mud flats. The tide was coming in. I could see it in the distance, the water advancing with unnatural speed across the flats. And then I saw the bore itself, this wall of water, maybe 3 feet high, churning and frothing as it pushed inland. It looked alive, hungry. I raised my camera and started shooting. The sound was incredible, this low roar that built and built until it filled everything. My chest vibrated with it. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse. And then I saw something in the wave. At first I thought it was debris, a log or maybe part of a boat caught in the surge. But it moved wrong. It moved with purpose, parallel to the wave, just beneath the surface. Something massive and dark that displaced water in a way that made my stomach drop. I zoomed in, my viewfinder filled with churning foam and mud-colored water. And for just a second, maybe two, I saw something that my brain still refuses to fully process. A shape, elongated, with what looked like segments or ridges running along its length. And at one end, something that might have been a head or a mouth. Too large, too many irregular protrusions that could have been eyes or teeth or something else entirely. The camera slipped from my hands. I caught it by the strap, but by the time I looked up again, the bore had passed and the thing was gone. Just churning water and mud spreading across the flats. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape. Those protrusions, the way it moved with the water like it was part of it, like it had always been there waiting. I went to the library the next morning. The local branch had a section on regional history and folklore, and I spent 6 hours going through everything I could find about Turnagain Arm. Most of it was standard stuff. Information about the Cook Inlet tribes who lived there before colonization. Warnings about the mudflats. Stories of people who got stuck and drowned as the tide came in. But buried in a collection of oral histories from the 1930s, I found something that made my blood run cold. An interview with an elderly Ina woman who talked about the old warnings her grandmother had passed down. About how the bore wasn't just dangerous because of the water. About how something lived in it. Something ancient that came in with the tide and took people who ventured too close to the flats. She called it different names, but the one that stuck with me was the hungry swimmer. The thing that moved through the bore and pulled people down into the mud where they'd never be found. The interviewer had noted in the margins that the woman seemed genuinely frightened recounting the stories. That she refused to elaborate further and asked that the tape be destroyed. It hadn't been. Someone had transcribed it and filed it away where almost nobody would ever read it. I went back to Turnagain Arm the next day. Do you know why? Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to convince myself I imagined it. Or maybe something was pulling me there, the same way moths circle closer and closer to flames until they burn. This time I brought everything. Multiple cameras, a drone, motion sensors. I set up at dawn in a spot where I could see a long stretch of the arm, and I waited. The tide was out. The mudflats stretched endlessly. The smell was there again, stronger now. That wrong organic stench that made my throat close up. Hours passed. The sun climbed, but never seemed to actually warm anything. And then, around 2 in the afternoon, I heard it. That sound. The low rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was louder than before. Closer. I grabbed my camera and started filming. The tide was coming in fast, racing across the flats. And there, maybe 100 yards out, I saw the mud flats moving. Not from the water. The mud itself was rippling, bulging upward in places like something massive was just beneath the surface, pushing up from underneath. The bore formed, that wall of water rushing inland with its terrible roar, and in it, clear as day through my zoom lens, I saw the thing again. But this time it wasn't hidden. This time it surfaced. To describe it properly, my mind keeps trying to make it into something familiar. A whale, a giant eel. But it was neither. It was wrong in every way something can be wrong. The body was segmented like it had been assembled from parts of different creatures. The color shifted between mud brown and something almost translucent. And the head, if you could call it that, was a mass of protrusions that writhed independently. Not tentacles exactly, more like thick fingers or feeders that reached and grasped at the air. It rose up from the bore, water and mud streaming off its body, and for a moment it seemed to look directly at me. I didn't know if it had eyes in any conventional sense, but I felt seen, recognized, marked. That's when I ran. I left everything, the cameras, the equipment, all of it. I scrambled up the rocky slope to my truck and drove back to Anchorage doing 70 on roads that should have been taken at 40. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I tried to go to the police, tried to tell them what I'd seen. The officer who took my statement was polite but distant. He asked if I'd been drinking, if I was on any medications. He told me that people see all kinds of things when they are alone in remote places, that the mind plays tricks, that maybe I should head home to Portland and get some rest. But I couldn't leave. Not yet, because 2 days after my sighting, I read in the local paper that a hiker had gone missing near Turnagain Arm. A 42-year-old man from Seattle who had gone down to the mudflats to take pictures during low tide. His camera was found near the waterline. His footprints led out onto the flats but never came back. Search and rescue had been suspended because of the dangerous conditions. I knew what had happened to him. I knew, but I couldn't prove it. And even if I could, who would believe me? I finally left Alaska a week ago. I drove straight through Canada back to Portland, only stopping when I absolutely had to. But I can still hear it, that breathing sound. And sometimes, late at night when the apartment is quiet, I swear I can smell that wrong organic stench. Like something followed me home. Like it marked me that day when it surfaced from the bore and looked my way. The D-net, I know woman was right. The bore is dangerous because of what lives in it. And now I understand why she refused to say more. Because once they've seen it, once it has seen you, you carry that knowledge like a weight that never lifts. You become part of the story that nobody believes. Another person who went to Turnagain Arm and came back wrong. I'll never go back to Alaska, but sometimes I wonder if that matters. Sometimes I wonder if distance means anything to something that ancient. Something that's been riding those tidal bores for thousands of years, taking what it wants when it wants. The locals know. They've always known. They stay away from the flats when the bore is coming. They don't to answer when they hear something calling from the water. And they never, ever look directly at the wave when it passes. I broke all those rules. And now I'm left with this story that I can tell anyone without seeing that look in their eyes. That polite skepticism. That unspoken assessment that maybe I'm not quite right anymore. But I am telling you, if you ever find yourself driving the Seward Highway along Turnagain Arm, and you feel that pull to stop and look at the mudflats, and you hear that low rhythmic breathing carried on the wind, do what the locals do. Get back in your car. Drive away. Don't look back. Because the hungry swimmer is real. And it's still out there, riding the bore, waiting for the next person who doesn't believe the warnings. Story 9. Fungal forest. I helped seal something beneath Anchorage that should never be unsealed. And now I think it was waking up. My name is Robert Chen. I am 61 years old, a retired civil engineer. And in 1974, I was part of a crew that discovered something under this city that the government spent 50 years trying to make everyone forget. But you can't forget what I saw down there. You can't unsee it. And lately, I am starting to think that sealing it up was the worst mistake we ever made. because I think it has been growing this whole time. Spreading. Getting ready. It started in March of 1974. Anchorage was booming back then. Oil money pouring in, population exploding. The city planners got ambitious. Decided we needed a subway system like New York or Chicago. Something modern. Something that would put us on the map as a real city, not just a frontier town with paved roads. I was 26, fresh out of engineering school, working for Morrison Knudsen. We won the contract for the preliminary excavation. The plan was simple: dig test tunnels under downtown, assess the bedrock, figure out if a subway was even feasible in permafrost conditions. Standard stuff. We worked on 3 other projects just like it. We started digging in early March. Using a tunnel boring machine we shipped up from Seattle. The first 2 weeks went perfectly. Solid bedrock, minimal groundwater. Exactly what we wanted to see. Then on March 19th, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, the drill bit broke through into empty space. The sound it made was wrong. Not the usual grinding of metal against stone. It was more like puncturing a membrane. A wet tearing sound that echoed through the tunnel and made every man on the crew stop what they were doing. The foreman, a guy named Jack Holloway, killed the power to the boring machine. In the sudden silence, we heard something else. Air moving. Not wind, not ventilation. Air pressure equalizing between 2 spaces that had been separated for a very long time. And the smell that came through that hole, I'll never forget it. Sweet and rotten at the same time, like fruit left to ferment in a sealed container. Like compost and sugar and something chemical underneath it all. It made my eyes water, made my stomach turn. Jack sent me and 2 other engineers, Mike and Tom, to investigate. We put on respirators, grabbed flashlights, and crawled through the opening the drill had made. It was tight, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, and the walls felt strange under my gloves. Not like rock, more like hardened clay or dried mud, but with a texture that reminded me of coral. We emerged into a cavern. I've been in caves before. Natural limestone caverns, lava tubes, mining shafts. This was different. The space was enormous, maybe 100 feet across and 30 feet high. But it wasn't natural. The walls were too smooth, too uniform. They curved in ways that suggested intention, purpose, and they were covered in growth. At first I thought it was ice. The formations looked crystalline, translucent, catching the light from our flashlights and refracting it in strange colors. But ice doesn't grow in fractals. Ice doesn't pulse. Because these things were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but moving. Expanding and contracting like they were breathing. They were mushrooms, fungus, the biggest specimens I'd ever seen. Some were taller than me, with caps 3 feet across. Others were smaller, growing in clusters that covered every surface like barnacles on a ship. This hull. The color was wrong too. Not the brown or white or gray of normal mushrooms. These were pale, almost translucent, with veins of darker material running through them like blood vessels. And they glowed, faintly, but definitely glowing. A bioluminescent blue-green that made the whole cavern look like it was underwater. Tom started taking photos. Mike was sketching the formations in his notebook. I was trying to figure out what I was looking at from a geological perspective. The cavern floor was covered in a thick layer of material that looked like snow but felt spongy underfoot. Mycelium, the root structure of the fungus. It had completely carpeted the ground in a dense, fibrous mat. That is when I saw the skeleton. It was in the center of the cavern, half buried in the mycelium. Massive, easily 30 feet long, maybe more. The skull alone was the size of a pickup truck. But the structure was all wrong. Too many leg bones. The spine curved in impossible ways. The ribs formed a cage that looked more like a basket than a skeleton. I couldn't identify the species. Couldn't even identify the class. It was like nothing in any textbook I'd ever studied. And the mushrooms were growing through it, sprouting from the bones themselves, pushing up through eye sockets and vertebrae, using the skeleton as a scaffold for their growth. Mike noticed something on the cavern wall behind the skeleton. Markings. At first I thought they were natural formations, mineral deposits creating patterns in the rock. But as we got closer, the intention became clear. They were symbols, not any language I recognized. Geometric shapes arranged in sequences that suggested meaning. Whatever had made this cavern had left a message. We spent 6 hours down there, documenting everything we could. The temperature was wrong for a space that deep. Should have been just above freezing, standard for permafrost depth. but it was warmer, maybe 50 degrees, and the air, despite the respirators, had a taste, sweet and cloying, coating the back of my throat. When we finally climbed back through to the tunnel, Jack took one look at our faces and knew he found something serious. He radioed up to the surface. Within 3 hours, the site was crawling with military personnel, Army Corps of Engineers, CDC representatives, people in hazmat suits taking samples, and men in suits with no identification who asked us questions and took our notebooks and cameras. They told us the project was being suspended pending environmental assessment, told us not to discuss what we'd seen with anyone. Standard non-disclosure agreements, backed up by national security classifications that none of us understood. The official story was that we encountered a pocket of natural gas and unstable geology. The subway project was quietly canceled. The excavation was filled with concrete, thousands of tons of it, poured continuously for 3 weeks. They sealed that cavern like they were trying to bury a nuclear reactor. I thought that was the end of it. Went back to work on other projects, got married, had kids, retired in 2008 and settled into a quiet life in Anchorage. 50 years went by. The city grew. New buildings went up. The downtown area expanded. And I almost convinced myself that what I'd seen was just a weird geological anomaly. Something science would eventually explain. Then the dream started. It was about 6 months ago. Same dream every night. I'm back in that cavern, but it has changed. The mushrooms are bigger now. The mycelium has spread across the entire floor in a thick carpet. And the skeleton isn't there anymore. Instead, there are people, dozens of them, hundreds, standing motionless among the fungal growth, their skin pale and translucent, veins visible beneath the surface glowing that same blue-green as the mushrooms. They were not dead, but they were not alive either. They were something in between. And in the dream, I could feel what they were feeling. A collective consciousness, a hive mind. They were waiting, growing, getting ready to spread. I wake up every morning with that sweet, rotten smell in my nostrils. My wife asked me about it last month. Said I was bringing a strange odor into the house. Said it smelled like mushrooms. Then I started noticing things around the city. Small things at first. Mushrooms growing in places they shouldn't grow. Not normal mushrooms, pale ones, translucent, growing from cracks in concrete, pushing up through asphalt, sprouting from the drainage systems. I took samples to a mycologist at UAA. She couldn't identify the species. Said the cellular structure was unlike anything in the databases. Said it seemed to be resistant to temperature extremes and could survive in environments that would kill normal fungi. 3 weeks ago, people started getting sick. A new respiratory illness. Symptoms include fever, confusion, and vivid dreams. The hospitals are filling up. The CDC is investigating. But I know what it is. I've seen this before. In my dreams. In that cavern. The fungus is spreading through the water system. The spores are in the pipes. Every time someone turns on a faucet or takes a shower, they rebreathing it in. It is colonizing lungs, colonizing brains. And it is connecting people, creating a network. I can feel it happening. When I close my eyes, I can sense others. Hundreds of minds touching mine. Thousands, all dreaming the same dream. All seeing that cavern. All feeling the pull to go down, to find it, to join what is growing there. I tried to warn people, called the Army Corps of Engineers, the EPA, the mayor, his office. They think I'm the crazy old man. But Mike felt it too. I tracked him down 2 weeks ago. He's in Phoenix now, retired like me. When I mentioned the dreams, he went silent on the phone. Then he told me he's been having them too. Told me Tom killed himself in 1989. Jumped off a building in Seattle. Left a note saying he couldn't stop seeing the fungal forest. Couldn't stop feeling it growing inside him. Jack Holloway died in 2003. Lung cancer. But the autopsy found something unusual. His lungs were full of fibrous material that looked like mycelium. The pathologist ruled it a fungal infection. But Jack had been healthy right up until the end. Never smoked. Never had respiratory problems. It was like something had been growing inside him for 30 years, waiting. I am starting to think that sealing the cavern didn't contain it. I think it just gave it time to grow stronger, to spread its network through the geology beneath the city, to wait until it had enough biomass to push through. And now it's ready. The concrete is cracking. I've seen it myself. Went down to the old site last week, the place where we did the excavation. The street above it has developed massive fissures. City crews keep filling them, but they keep reopening. And from those cracks, late at night, that smell emerges. Sweet and rotten and familiar. Last night I had a different dream. I saw the cavern from above, like a map. And I saw the mycelium network spreading out from it in all directions. Miles and miles of it, running under the entire city. Under the homes and offices and schools. A vast underground ecosystem connected to thousands of people through their dreams. Through the spores in their lungs. Through something that is rewriting human consciousness one neuron at a time. We're being absorbed. Slowly, quietly, becoming part of something ancient that we accidentally woke up when we broke through that wall in 1974. This morning I looked in the mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. A faint blue-green glow beneath my skin. Just a hint, barely visible, but it is there, in my veins, in my eyes. I am becoming translucent, becoming part of the network, part of the fungal forest. I am writing this while I still can, while my mind is still my own, because soon I want to be able to resist the pull. Soon I'll go down into the streets through those cracks and find my way back to that cavern. And I'll join the others who are already there. The ones who have been dreaming long enough to make the journey. The ones who are standing motionless in the dark, breathing spores, becoming something new. If you in Anchorage and you start having dreams about a glowing cavern beneath the city, don't to ignore them. Don't to drink the water. Don't to breathe too deep, because it is already inside you, growing, connecting, transforming. The fungal forest is thawing after 50 years of darkness. And when it finally breaks through to the surface, this whole city is going to become something else. Something that thinks with one mind. Something that spreads. I can feel it calling me now. Feel it pulling. And God help me, part of me wants to answer. Story 10. Ice fog that remembers the ice fog in Fairbanks is not like regular fog. It does not just obscure your vision or make driving dangerous. It remembers, and in the winter of 2024, it started showing me things that had not happened yet. Things I could not prevent no matter how hard I tried. I moved to Fairbanks in 2019 for work. I was a project manager for an oil services company. 43 years old, divorced, no kids. The kind of guy who took a job in Alaska because there was nothing keeping him anywhere else. The winters were brutal, but the pay was good and the isolation suited me. I rented a small house on the edge of town and learned to live with 6 months of darkness and temperatures that could drop to 50 below. The locals warned me about the ice fog. It forms when the temperature falls below -40 and moisture in the air freezes instantly into tiny ice crystals that hang suspended, creating a thick white cloud that can reduce visibility to a few feet. It is a natural phenomenon. Science can explain it, but the old-timers in Fairbanks talked about it differently. They said the fog had a memory. They said if you looked into it long enough, you might see things that used to be. I thought it was just local folklore, the kind of stories people tell to make the endless winter nights more interesting. Then January 2024 came, and I learned they were telling the truth. The cold snap hit on a Tuesday. The temperature plummeted to -45 and stayed there for days. Ice fog rolled into Fairbanks like a living thing, thick and white and utterly still. I had to drive to the office despite the conditions. Company policy. If the trucks could run, we had to work. I left my house at 7 in the morning, when it was still pitch dark. The fog was so dense I could barely see the hood of my truck. I crept along at 5 miles per hour, following the vague glow of streetlights, my hands gripping the wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. That was when I saw the car. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, a pale blue sedan from the 1950s, maybe a Chevrolet. It was driving perpendicular to my path, crossing the road from right to left. I slammed on my brakes. My truck slid on the ice but stopped in time. The blue car continued smoothly across the road and disappeared into the fog on the other side. There was no sound, no engine noise, no crunch of tires on snow. It simply glided past like a projection, like something not entirely there. I sat in my truck, heart hammering, telling myself I had imagined it. The fog played tricks on your eyes. Everyone knew that. But when I finally forced myself to drive forward and reach the spot where the car had crossed, there were no tire tracks in the snow. The road was smooth and untouched. I made it to work shaken but convinced I had experienced some kind of optical illusion. My coworker, a guy named Jim who had lived in Fairbanks his whole life, just nodded when I told him about it. He said the fog showed you things sometimes. Old things, echoes of the past frozen in the air. He said his grandfather had seen a horse-drawn wagon in the fog once, driving down a street that had been paved for 60 years. He said a friend of his had heard voices in the fog, a conversation in Russian between fur traders who had been dead for a century. I asked him if he believed it. He looked at me with the patient expression of someone explaining an obvious truth to a fool and said that in Alaska, you learned not to question what the land showed you. You just accepted it and moved on. The fog lasted for 8 days. Every morning, driving to work, I saw something. A woman in a long dress walking along the roadside, her clothing from another era. A dog team pulling a sled down the middle of a modern intersection. Once, an entire building that I knew had been torn down in the 1980s, standing solid and complete for just a moment before fading back into white nothingness. They were always silent, always translucent, always gone before I could really process what I was seeing. The fog was replaying history, showing fragments of the past that had somehow been preserved in the frozen air. Then, on the 8th day, something changed. I was driving home from work in the late afternoon. The sun had set hours earlier. The fog was thicker than it had been all week, so dense that I could not see more than 3 feet ahead. I was crawling along, following the faint yellow line at the edge of the road, when I saw headlights approaching. Another car, coming toward me in my lane. I honked, flashed my high beams. The car kept coming. I could see it clearly now. A modern SUV, maybe 5 years old. Dark blue, Alaska plates. It was driving fast. Too fast for these conditions, weaving slightly as if the driver was drunk or panicking. I jerked my wheel to the right, mounting the snow berm to avoid a head-on collision. The SUV roared past me, close enough that I could see through its windows. A man driving, his mouth open in a scream, his face young and terrified. And then he was gone, swallowed by the fog behind me. I sat there shaking, my truck half buried in the snow berm. That had felt different from the other apparitions. More solid, more real. The man, his expression had been too vivid, too full of genuine terror. This was not some peaceful echo of the past. This was something else. I managed to get my truck back onto the road and continued home. But I could not stop thinking about that man, his face. About the way he had been driving, like he was running from something or towards something, like he had seconds to live and knew it. The next morning, the fog began to lift. The temperature rose to a relatively balmy -20. Visibility improved. Life in Fairbanks returned to normal. But I checked the news obsessively, waiting for a report of an accident involving a dark blue SUV. Nothing came. No crashes, no deaths, no missing persons matching the description of the terrified young man I had seen. 3 days later, I saw him again. I was getting coffee at a gas station near my house. He walked in, alive and solid and real. The same young face, the same build. He was wearing a parka and talking on his phone, laughing about something. He looked happy, relaxed, nothing like the screaming, panicked driver I had seen in the fog. I could not help myself. I approached him, asked if he drove a dark blue SUV. He looked at me strangely but said yes. I asked if he had been driving during the ice fog last week, if he had been in an accident or had a close call. He said no, he had stayed home the whole time the fog was bad. His girlfriend had forbidden him to drive in it. I thanked him and left quickly, my mind racing. If he had not been driving in the fog, then what had I seen? Not a memory of the past. The car had been too new, the man too young. It could not have been something that had already happened. Unless the fog was not just remembering the past anymore. Unless it had started showing the future. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had seen this man driving in terror, screaming, rushing towards some disaster. And it had not happened yet. It was going to happen. The fog had shown me a glimpse of something still to come. I tried to warn him. I went back into the gas station, but he was already gone. I did not know his name. Did not know where he lived. I had no way to find him. No way to tell him to be careful. To avoid driving. To change whatever path was going to put him behind that wheel in such obvious danger. For 2 weeks, I obsessed over it. I searched local news. I drove past the gas station hoping to see him again. But Fairbanks is small enough to feel isolated and big enough to lose someone if you do not know where to look. I found nothing. Then the fog came back. Another cold snap. Another week of -40 temperatures. The ice fog rolled in thicker than before, and this time I knew what I was looking at. Not memories, previews, warnings that no one could act on because they came with no context. No dates. No way to know when these future moments would become present reality. I saw a house fire. The flames impossibly bright against the white fog. A family running out in their pajamas, the mother carrying a child. I recognized the house. It was 3 blocks from mine. I drove there immediately, but everything was fine. No fire, no smoke, just a normal home with lights on and people living their lives, unaware that the fog had shown me their future catastrophe. I saw a truck jackknifed across the highway, blocking all lanes. I saw a woman slipping on ice and falling, her head hitting the pavement with a crack I felt in my bones even though there was no sound. I saw a small plane crash landing in a field. Its propeller bent, its windshield shattered. All of it silent, all of it brief, all of it inevitable. I tried to report what I saw. I called the police and told them about the house fire, gave them the address, begged them to do a safety inspection. They took my information politely and did nothing. I called the airport about the plane crash and they asked me when it happened. I could not answer that. I could not tell them it had not happened yet because then they would have thought I was insane. Maybe I was insane. Maybe the isolation and the darkness and the cold had finally broken something in my brain. Maybe I was having elaborate hallucinations brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning or a brain tumor or simple loneliness. But then the dark blue SUV crashed. It happened 3 weeks after the fog lifted. I saw it on the news. A single vehicle accident on the Parks Highway. The driver had lost control on black ice and rolled the vehicle multiple times. He was alive but in critical condition. They showed his photo. It was him, the young man from the gas station, the one I had seen screaming behind the wheel as he rushed toward his fate. I had known. The fog had shown me, and I had been powerless to stop it. After that, I stopped trying to prevent what I saw. What was the point? The fog showed fragments without context, moments without timestamps. I could not save anyone because I never knew when or exactly where these events would occur. All I could do was watch the future unfold in white crystal clouds and wait for reality to catch up. The fog came again last month. I saw my own truck wrapped around a telephone pole, the front end crushed, the windshield starred with impact. I saw my own body slumped over the steering wheel, my face gray, my eyes empty. The fog showed me my death, and it gave me no way to avoid it. So now I live differently. I drive carefully. I avoid unnecessary trips. I try to change the pattern of my life in hopes that whatever sequence of events leads to that telephone pole can be disrupted. But deep down, I know it does not work that way. The fog does not show possibilities. It shows certainties. It shows what will be, not what might be. The old-timers were right about the ice fog. It does remember, but they were wrong about what it remembers. It does not just hold on to the past. It reaches forward too, pulling moments from the future and freezing them in the present, letting us see our fates before we live them. And there is something worse than not knowing what will happen to you. It is knowing exactly what will happen and being powerless to change it. It is seeing your death written in ice crystals and white fog, as certain as memory, as unavoidable as yesterday. The fog has shown me what is coming, and now all I can do is wait for the temperature to drop again, for the air to freeze, for that terrible white cloud to roll back into Fairbanks and show me something new. Something I cannot stop. Something I cannot fix. Something that has already happened in whatever strange space the fog exists in, where past and future collapse into one eternal frozen present, and all of time is visible at once to something that remembers everything, including the ends we have not yet reached. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice, but sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.